This electric unicycle changed my mind. What started out as a pretty deep disappointment ended up being a humongous triumph. This is the Extreme Bull Griffin, and this is Wheel Good Time. With the Extreme Bull Griffin, at first, I didn't like this EUC. But before you immediately dismiss this wheel like I did at first, keep watching because it might just change your mind too. So let's get started talking about it, starting with the power. After riding my first 50 feet on the Griffin, my very first impression of this wheel was that it was extremely eager to accelerate. It has no hesitation or delay when you lean forward, even at low speeds. After having ridden the Lynx and the Sherman L extensively, I found that the Griffin has less hesitation to accelerate than both of those, and it just goes when you ask it to. To put it differently, it has outstanding low-end torque and superior acceleration times. That's largely due to the 4,000 watt motor on this wheel. And even though it has, air quotes, only 151 volts, it was shockingly capable and incredibly eager to accelerate. But being the powerful wheel that this is, I also discovered that the Griffin is a thirsty wheel. It drinks power quickly. Let me put it in perspective. The Bugatti Chiron was at one point one of the fastest cars in the world, topping out at 273 miles per hour. The gas tank on that car is 30 liters. But driving it at top speed will cause that car to be completely empty in only 9 minutes. Like all high-performance EUCs, the Griffin behaves in a similar manner with the way it drinks power, but we'll talk more about that after we discuss the suspension. Initially, Extreme Bull promised us a coil and oil type suspension, a very similar kind to the way that Leaperchem uses. But then as the release date got closer, they decided to change it to an air suspension. And on that day, that was the exact moment that the entire EUC community, including myself, immediately lost interest in this wheel. Why is that though? Because of our history with air suspensions. I've personally never met a Bigode EUC that didn't leak air out of its air suspension. The InMotion V11 was revolutionary for its time just because it had a suspension. But now that we've been treated to much better suspensions, the air suspension on the V11 is not very good. The same thing can be said for the V13, which also has an air suspension. So we've never actually had a good air suspension in an EUC yet. Well, that just changed. The reason why I wasn't a fan of this wheel in the beginning was not just because of what I expected with the air suspension, but also because I did have originally an issue with the air suspension right out of the box. But since then, Extreme Bull has made a modification to the production models on the suspension that fixes this for everybody. We have one top chamber here, and we have a compression adjustment knob here, and that's it. So with the Griffin, you're not able to have as much customizability with your suspension, such as with preload and damping. But despite the lack of customizability on the air suspension on the Griffin, this thing was a plush ride. I was blown away at how awesome of a ride this wheel really provided. Let's take just a quick pause to thank the sponsor of this video, Next Gen Mobility. Next Gen Mobility has graciously offered this demo unit EUC for review purposes. Get yourself an incredible deal on the Griffin or any EUC at nextgenmobility.org. But for now, let's talk about the range and the batteries. The Griffin comes with 2,700 watt hours of 50S high-performance batteries in a 4P configuration. So it's able to output 100 amps of current continuously all the way until empty. What I didn't expect was how much battery the Griffin would drink when I pushed it to its limits. I took it on a range test to see how far I could ride it, but this isn't a normal range test. I don't have the patience to do an 80-mile long ride at 20 miles an hour on bike paths just to see if the Griffin can do it. I see that as a huge waste of an entire day. So I took it on a torture test. This would be the absolute minimum range you can expect when riding the Griffin and pushing it the entire time. Riding through winding country roads with very few stops, averaging between 40 and 52 miles per hour, I was only able to get about 22 miles of range. I turned around to head home with just over 50% battery and continued riding it hard all the way until the battery level sagged down to 3%. Admittedly, getting that much range is pretty disappointing if you ride extremely fast and hard. To compare it to its competitor, the Lynx was able to get 29 miles on the exact same route. But on the other hand, I didn't have any field weakening enabled on the Griffin, and it had at least a 34% PWM safety margin the entire time. What that means is that it could have gone significantly faster than I was taking it to. I was as safe as a person could be in terms of safety margin. As many of you people already know, the free spin speed on a wheel is largely a meaningless thing. Electric unicycle manufacturers can pretty much set the free spin speed to just about whatever arbitrary number they want before it cuts out from the software telling it to. So what we truly care about is the maximum actual riding speed. In my range torture test, I took the wheel up to about 52 miles per hour. And since I had about a 34% PWM safety margin the entire time, minimum, I believe this wheel is able to go significantly faster than that. Now granted, exponentially more power is required out of a wheel the faster and faster and faster you go. So you're going to get diminishing returns. Now that said, I believe the Griffin should be able to hold 60 to 65 miles per hour GPS speed without any problems. The Griffin has a happy speed of about 42 miles per hour. This is tied with the Lynx's 42 miles per hour happy speed as well, but for different reasons. Both EUCs are excellent on the racetrack, but the Griffin is certainly capable of going faster than the Lynx in terms of top speed. The Griffin is also very stable at high speeds, and the fact that it has a nice wide 90-90-14 tire makes this EUC truly excellent. But the fact that it is rather lightweight means that it lacks a little bit of the stability that is inherent to heavier wheels, and that's just an unavoidable fact. The included tire is a CST tubeless tire, but it happens to also have a tube inserted. I just don't know why EUC manufacturers continue to make that choice and continue to put a tubeless tire on the wheel, but then put a tube in there. Maybe the rim on the Griffin is not designed to take a tube. I'm not really sure. I can't really fault Extreme Bull entirely for this, because really just about every EUC manufacturer is still doing this, where they're including a tube. But other than this little blemish on the tire's record, this tire is still a really good one, and because of the rounded profile, I think it's going to make an excellent choice on the racetrack. Another thing that surprised me about the Griffin is that it's actually a shockingly capable jumping wheel. That is, not an excellent trail jumping wheel, but it's an excellent jumping wheel nonetheless. I'm not an expert jumper, trust me. I'm not very good at it, so don't take my word for it. Instead, take the word of my friend Will, who happens to be one of the world's best jumpers on an EUC and has historically cleared jumps in excess of 48 feet.
I really was expecting it to do some funky tilt backs, some airtime tilt backs. I was expecting a lot of things to maybe not go wrong, but not to go so great, especially because I'm not so used to it. But it flies wonderfully. It's very stable in the air. It's not heavy. You don't feel the weight. You feel the power behind it. And I didn't feel like it struggled for power. So as for jumping, I definitely approve of this wheel, same as I would for others, if not better at this point. There was no bottoming out. And that's another thing that I was scared about. I was scared of going a little bit too fast. I didn't want to bottom this out with the newer style suspension, and it didn't do that whatsoever. It felt really good, really cushy when I was landing. So I'm happy, and I'm looking forward to jumping this a lot more. It was just an extremely stable experience, and it's very fast, especially at the takeoff. I'm not sure if you were like noticing, but I could get there pretty quickly, and by the time I looked at my speedometer, I was nearing 40 miles per hour on a relatively short distance.
Right.
And I really wasn't expecting that, and I felt like it had a lot more to give. There was no beat, and just it just felt wonderful.
Let's talk about post-purchase recommendations. As with most EUCs, you might have to buy something to go along with your EUC to make it rideable right out of the box. The Griffin is largely turnkey. It's largely completely ready to ride, except for one thing, the pads. The pads on the Griffin that come in the box are completely flat here, and that makes for undue pressure on your shin because really your shins are rounded in the front. So for that reason, your ride is not going to be very comfortable with these pads here. They look nice, they're large, they have a huge surface area for mounting it, but they're just not very good. It's going to be a painful ride. So for that reason, I recommend Vertex pads. These are my personal favorites. I recommend them because they are nice and rounded here. It makes it so you're able to apply pressure against the wheel and torque it properly and do it comfortably. And don't even get me started on the rear pads that come with this. This is just weird shaped. It's small. It doesn't have a whole lot of surface area for applying pressure against it to brake properly. Compare that to the Vertex pads here, which are obnoxiously large here. They have tons of surface area. You're able to really apply all the pressure that you need against the rear of the wheel for proper braking. Trust me, if you want to fundamentally transform and improve the way your ride is on an EUC, use aftermarket pads. It's going to change the game. And with the Griffin, this is the one and only post-purchase recommendation that I make. In the end, I found the Griffin to be extremely powerful and lightweight compared to its battery capacity and overall size. Surprisingly, one of the biggest high points of this wheel is actually the air suspension on it. And the biggest complaint that I have about this wheel has got to be the range on this wheel. It's not horrible, but I feel like they could do a little bit better with a firmware update. One of my favorite EUC reviewers called this a Lynx on a budget, and I don't think that's completely accurate, primarily because the Lynx is highly capable on the street and the trail, whereas I feel like the Griffin is much more at home on the street rather than the trail, primarily due to the low battery boxes. The Griffin has definitely earned its place in the world on the street and on the racetrack because of its lower center of gravity due to the battery boxes being lower, but also because of the oh-so-smooth air suspension and the ridiculous amount of power that this thing has. Another fantastic thing about the Griffin is the price tag. Compared to its competitors, it's actually a little bit cheaper. If you enjoy seeing the latest news, reviews, leaks, and commentary on all things EUC, make sure you hit that subscribe button before you take off. That's all for now. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.